In this update, we've got Major Hurricane Lee still spinning out there into the Atlantic. In fact, the National Hurricane Hunters are out there investigating the storm as we speak, and looks to me that it actually might be ticking up a notch in intensity. That will continue to traverse and get a little bit closer towards the East Coast. At the same time, we've got a pretty significant trough going to be built in and across the Great Lakes. Out ahead of it, we're going to be getting some very heavy rain across portions of the Northeast and into New England. But this also is going to be the culprit of bringing much cooler conditions for many areas across the country. At the same time, we've got a much more active subtropical jet stream. You can see these pulses of energy that will be coming across, bringing all those cloudier conditions and some heavier rains across these and just much cooler air. At the same time, we've got the Pacific Northwest that kind of misses out on this deal. In fact, they actually get the ridge, so they get the drier conditions and the much warmer conditions. You can see that on the temperature anomalies as that cooler air funnels a little bit further south. That will be replaced with over 100 million Americans going below average for the first time in a long time with a pretty good cool blast for much of the country. And it's not just a one-day wonder. It's going to actually last all week long as much cooler conditions start to funnel in. So if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button. In your end, you get all my daily content on this channel, and I would love to reach 200,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and you can help me get there by subscribing to the channel and following all my daily content. So let's break down the details. Look at the afternoon temperature, folks. That abrupt change is already kind of starting with that backdoor front that's funneling in from the Great Lakes. These are afternoon temperatures at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Look at that in the 50s, folks, across the Great Lakes, but they're sharing some of that cooler air with the rest of us for the middle of the country. Even further south, you can kind of tell where the rain is right now in New Mexico and Colorado here into portions of the Texas Panhandle. But look how far south those temperatures go. I mean, that's the first time Dallas has seen 80s since July the 16th, folks. That's a significant change in the weather. And like I mentioned, it's not a one or two-day wonder. It's actually an all-week deal that you're going to be replaced with much more cooler than average conditions. It's actually going to be feeling a lot more like October-like than what it is, for the middle of September. So here's the setup on the vorticity map. So obviously there is Lee that will be tracking every step of the way, but there's this significant low pressure, and out ahead of it, you're still going to get some heavier rains, even into portions of Wednesday across portions of the Northeast. But look at that, more of a Pacific flow. That's the southern jet stream getting a little bit more active. So you're going to have waves of energy. It's not just all at once. These are waves. These are just subtle impulses in the atmosphere. You've got the northwest flow. You've got cold air draining in from the north. Hey, if you're a snow lover and this was like January, this would actually be an ideal type setup with the cold air draining in, and you got pulses of energy coming in from the west. And with the combination of the dynamic cooling, just rain alone cools the atmosphere. So the trend will be a slightly colder as you get deeper into the week. And colder, I mean, instead of the 80s, some of these areas will be replaced with the 70s for highs under rainier conditions, cloudier conditions, a good 60 to 80% coverage across, portions of New Mexico, into Oklahoma, into the Texas Panhandle, into North Texas, even Central Texas, gets into the action. That'll eventually squeeze into portions of Louisiana. But the setup on Wednesday, there's the upper level low. There's that low pressure center, and that counterclockwise swirl. It's typically the right side loaded, and that you got to have lift, right? You got to have some sort of lift in the atmosphere to create showers and thunderstorms, and that's exactly what this trough provides. And that's going to be the form of more heavy rain across a good part of the East Coast, especially into the Northeast and getting into New England. There's that southern flow, right? So you got the southern flow with the active jet stream across the south. That's going to send those pulses of energy and waves of rain for them. And there it is, folks. Going into that Wednesday time frame, you've got a marginal risk for areas into Arizona, back into Colorado, into New Mexico. A good part of Texas is going to get some welcome rains, and there's the complements of that trough, right? So here's the heavier rains that's going to be shifting into portions of Delaware, getting into New Jersey, into Long Island, into a good part of Connecticut, into Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and going into Maine. And that's not from Lee yet. That's from the trough that will be out ahead of Lee. We'll break down the details for Lee and what's to come. But going into Thursday, we've got another impulse of energy. And by that time, all layers of the atmosphere should be saturated. And so by the time it gets into these portions of Oklahoma and getting into North Texas, it's going to likely be some heavier rain. And some of those could be 1 to 2 inch per hour type rainfall rates, as the atmosphere would likely be saturated. There's a lot of heat, obviously, that's built up in the upper levels, and that the atmosphere is going to be overturning, and that's going to be enough to bring out some very heavy rain and some much needed rain. And even Central Texas gets into the action going into East Texas. All these areas are definitely under an exceptional and extreme drought. So here's the setup going into Thursday. So Thursday is going to be a pretty significant day. You've got still a major hurricane with Lee, possibly a 957 millibar, major hurricane still, right? And you got the trough moving back. You've got these waves of energy. There's the heavier rain across those areas into portions of the southern plains, and there's the cooler conditions, right? These are possibly high temperatures going into Thursday. So you see the temperatures now, they continue, if not, if they get a little bit cooler, and that as that cold air funnels south, there's that ridge. It finally backs up into Mexico, and there are only hundreds in town. You got to go pretty far south, like Laredo and to the Rio Grande Valley, and going into the Baja, going into Mexico. You still might get some hundreds, but that's nothing compared to what these areas just saw 7 days ago. So this is a welcome relief to see widespread 70s and 80s so far south. They will take it, trust me. But we got to be watching the timing of this trough and the timing of this ridge. Like I mentioned, I think Thursday is going to be the significant day, because here is the setup on Thursday. We still got the trough, right? We still got that trough built, still over in place. But the problem is, this is Thursday night, right? So by Friday night, the trough is pretty much gone, right? I mean, it goes away. And look what happens. This ridge tries to sneak a little bit further south. And if that's strong enough, that's going to be enough to push Lee further in towards the East Coast. So that's been the situation that we've been talking about kind of for many days, on this channel. And it looks to be this ridge might have a turn towards the East Coast at the end of the period, likely towards the Nantucket region, Boston, going into Portland, Maine. Those areas still could get some, closer to hurricane force wind gust with this particular storm. I mean, right now, the latest guidance still has it as possibly amenable hurricane or a very strong tropical storm, even all the way up into Maine, which is kind of a rare feat to make it that far north. But the waters are fairly warm still across this region, and it does appear that's going to be taking that slight turn towards the East Coast and have a little bit greater impact. So between now and then, here's the setup between now and Saturday morning. So really, all this takes place because of the trough. Once it moves out, the rain kind of shuts down. So before that, you're going to get some beneficial rain. So it still stays high and dry. You got the ridge, the ridge, you're pretty much dominating the West Coast and the Pacific Northwest. Clear as a bell, right? Not much rain to fall out of the atmosphere. But complements of the Northwest flow and the subtropical jet stream, these pulses of energy that come in through the Four Corners regions, through portions of Colorado into New Mexico, really kind of the bullseye sets up over portions of Oklahoma and Texas. Much needed rain, even West Texas, Central Texas, North Texas. There's likely going to be a 2 to 4 inch swath of that heavier rain, some isolated heavier amounts. And then out ahead of the trough, you're going to get the heavier rains along the East Coast, going from Florida to along the East Coast, all the way up into the Northeast, into New England. So now let's break down Lee. right? So with the latest update, like I said, it does appear any subtle changes, it gets dangerously close to Nantucket towards the Portland region. And most guidance actually has this making landfall into Maine as a strong tropical storm, if not a low-end Category 1 hurricane sometime on Saturday. So that's what we're looking at right now. And if this track does in fact come to fruition, here's some just kind of guesstimated wind gusts that could unfold across these regions into 78 miles an hour across the Nantucket region, going into 58 miles an hour into Providence, 57 and possibly in Boston. You know, as you go inland, a little bit lighter, but still in the 40s with wind gusts. But look at the 90s just lurking offshore. So if it again, if it dips just a little bit further off to the west, then obviously those change big time. And as it continues to lift north, it still stays, you know, minimal hurricane or strong tropical storm. But it does, in fact, it actually makes landfall likely in portions of the Northeast, or likely possibly in Maine or Nova Scotia, as a high-end tropical storm or as a low-end hurricane. So that looks to be the case. And like I mentioned, if it does just shift a little bit further off into the west, some of those higher wind gusts, even up into Maine, could be on the cusp of hurricane force winds. And this would be the day, you know, on Saturday time frame. But look what might be trailing behind Lee. So we got yet another storm. This is going to peak season. You got Hurricane Margot out there, but now we've got 5 hurricanes for so far this season. And this one looks to be our next storm. So we'll be tracking this one after Lee, course, this weekend. But what happens this week, right? So you've got the significant change. This whole area has been plenty above average, right, to start off September. Then the change came in this week with the abrupt changes, with the trough digging in from the Great Lakes, and that feeds further south. So this whole area is actually going to be kind of below average. But that once the trough moves out on Saturday, that's going to be replaced by more of a Pacific, more of a zonal flow. And that's typically a much more warmer flow as the ridge tries to build back in. We're not talking hundreds or anything like that, but we are probably talking 90s coming back for a good part of the south, and well above average temperatures for September standards. Remember, you got less daylight every single day. The temperature, the average temperatures does decrease. So even when you're looking at above average, like the map shows, we're not talking like heat dome material now. We're just talking well above average for this time of year. But you can see the change. We were above average last week. The significant trough comes in this week, and then the ridge builds back in the following week. Right, so you kind of get this flip-flop in the weather, and sometimes you see this in September, right? I mean, you get, but definitely once the trough moves out and once you experience those cooler light conditions, we are looking, in fact, replacing that with a fairly dominant ridge. Is going to be a cusp of a good part of the southern plains, the central plains, and much of the upper Midwest, and even the East Coast is going to be above average, likely for that third week of September. And like I said, completely the opposite. Where you are warm now, you're going to turn a little bit colder across the west as you get into the following week. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch my next update. Fire protect you before and after storm.